I want to talk about the idea in real anthroposophy about not losing sight of Rudolf Steiner's true legacy. And I think people who are watching these, say, challenging videos about what is real anthroposophy and what is not, should understand this particular idea. I've mentioned some things in passing, but at the same time it's important to take some time to focus, you might say, so as to not lose sight of a kind of why this work is being created. From a certain point of view, you could say that there are two paths in anthroposophy. Now, I'm going to read to you from Occult Science and Outline. In this version, it's begins on page 255, goes to 256. It's about 4/5 of the way through chapter 5. The path that leads to sense-free thinking, by way of the communications of spiritual science, is thoroughly reliable and sure. There is, however, another that is even more sure, and above all, more exact. At the same time, it is for many people also more difficult. The path in question is set forth in my books, The Theory of Knowledge Implicit in Goethe's World Conception, and The Philosophy of Spiritual Activity. These books tell of what man's thinking can achieve when directed not to the impressions that come from the outer world of the physical senses, but solely upon itself. When this is so, we have within us no longer the kind of thinking that concerns itself merely with memories of things of the senses. We have instead pure thinking, which is like a being that has life within itself. In the above-mentioned books you will find nothing at all that is derived from the communications of spiritual science. They testify to the fact that pure thinking, working within itself alone, can throw light on the great questions of life, questions concerning the universe and man. The books thus occupy a significant intermediary position between knowledge of the sense world and knowledge of the spiritual world. What they offer is what thinking can attain when it rises above sense observation, yet still holds back from entering upon spiritual supersensible research. One who wholeheartedly pursues the train of thought indicated in these books is already in the spiritual world, only it makes itself known to him as a thought world. Whoever feels ready to enter upon this intermediate path of development will be taking a safe and sure road, and it will leave with him a feeling in regard to the higher world that will bear rich fruit through all time to come. Now that's something that should be read several times. I'm not going to burden you in this video with that, but I did want to point it out, and I'm going to say some more things. I want to add that here's this book, which is by Florin Louds, called Enlivening the Chakra of the Heart. It's basically about his work with the path that we might call the knowledge of higher worlds path. And in the last section, on page 170 through, in section 2, he talks about Rudolf Steiner's two paths of esotericism. He makes the distinction that has just been made. And he talks about what these two things mean. He promises a book, which I don't know has been published, to be about the philosophy of freedom path, because this one is about knowledge of higher worlds path. But remains to be seen whether he was able to actually accomplish that. Now again, let's return to the basic question that we're facing here, which is Rudolf Steiner's true legacy. Okay, here is something which is quoted a couple of different times in Prokofiev's book on the philosophy of freedom. This refers to a conversation that apparently occurred between Steiner and Walter Johannes Stein in 1922. I asked Rudolf Steiner, "What will remain of your work thousands of years from now?" He replied, "Nothing but the philosophy of freedom. But in it everything else is contained. If one realizes the act of freedom described there, one can discover the whole content of Anthroposophy." Now, you will have heard me speak earlier about the difference between method and content. And here is Steiner actually using the terms content of Anthroposophy. In the section I just read you from Occult Science, he talks about spiritual science. And he talks about that as different. Let's go back and take a look at this. The path that leads to sense-free thinking by way of the communications of spiritual science is thoroughly reliable and sure. There is, however, another that is even more sure and above all more exact. Okay, the communications of spiritual science. The whole content of Anthroposophy. Here we find a recognition of what Owen Barfield pointed out, and which I had already discovered myself and was confirmed for me by Owen Barfield, that Anthroposophy is the method, not the content. And it is the cognitive method. That is, it is a particular type of thinking which Rudolf Steiner discovered through his own practices, which thinking, by its nature, involves a metamorphosis of ordinary thinking into something new. And this product of this metamorphosis, which requires our own activity to produce, only comes into existence through this process of what I have been calling the scientific investigation of the own mind. Now, Rudolf Steiner produced these books, Theory of Knowledge Implicit in Goethe's World Conception, and The Philosophy of Freedom, on the cusp of the transition from the 19th to the 20th centuries, in Central Europe at a time when natural science in its materialistic sense had achieved some of its high points. It goes on, this science, to other adventures, but by that point Darwinian evolution was in play, and a whole lot that goes on in terms of how people understand the world was accomplished. Now, those views of natural science were based on a certain idea, which we could say this way: there is a split between thinking and the world. Again, there is a split between thinking and the world. Rudolf Steiner, in developing these books, healed that split. He made it possible for human beings to once more integrate their thinking with the world. In different places in his writing, you'll find him saying things like, man's consciousness is so inserted into the world that the totality is divided into two. This is Steiner's true legacy, the healing of the split in the world caused by the insertion of our consciousness into it. Think about it. Thank you.